Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Fun and Games Podcast. I'm Jeff Moonen.
I'm Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
And as much as we haven't really been topical in these previous episodes, with the exception of our talk about the Switch, something big happened recently that we definitely want to talk about in both immediate and far-reaching terms.
Which, of course, is E3. As of when we're recording, it's about a week past E3 and all of its glorious announcements, and by the time you hear this, it will be 2 weeks past. So I think still relatively recent enough to be worth discussing.
Absolutely. And in general, this is the first E3 that I've paid any significant attention to. That is to say, this is the first time I actually watched any of it live. And kind of following on announcements. I mean, naturally, as somebody who's played games for a very long time and has definitely been on the internet for most of my life, I see the fallout of announcements. I see the discussions that happen. But for whatever reason, this was the first one that, I don't know, I guess I paid more attention to.
I mean, I'd agree, too. I think for me, it's because the last couple of E3s were during when I was planning my wedding and during when I didn't have a computer that really worked. And, you know, I didn't have a new console yet. But since the last E3, I've gotten invested in my PS4, very invested in my Nintendo Switch, and I have a computer that's a gaming behemoth. So it made me more intrigued to see what's coming. It's also interesting because over the last few years, it's gone from just the three major competitors, Xbox, PlayStation, Nintendo, to having conferences, to some of the biggest publishers also having conferences, which wasn't always the case.
Yes, and it seems as though that's becoming a almost a legacy style thing where Bethesda did not have a very big showcase this year, but they were here last year. So It's the idea of don't do a good job once because they'll expect you to do it every time.
Right. And we're not here to say who won E3 because that nonsense is just that nonsense. I will say personally,
Agreed.
I was most excited for the Switch stuff because it's the game system I'm most focused on and playing the most. But, you know, and I've gone back and watched the Sony and Xbox conferences, but since I don't have an Xbox One and I haven't been playing my PS4 lately, I was just kind of like, okay, this is cool. And I want to start by actually talking about Ubisoft and Nintendo very briefly because I want to talk a little bit about expectations, which is what E3 is all about. You know, it's setting expectations for the next year in gaming. It's setting expectations for what these companies are capable of. And I think it was about a month ago, an image was leaked for a game called Rabbids and Mario Kingdom Battle, which when I saw it as someone who doesn't really like the Rabbids at all, went, okay, why are we doing this? What's the point of this mashup? But since E3, I've gotten very excited about this game because Ubisoft is partnering with Nintendo to make a tactical shooter on the Switch, which it's like playing XCOM, but with Mario characters, which I am now very excited about, which completely flipped my expectations based on just the images and the whispers I heard about this game.
Yeah, very much so. And as somebody who will admit to getting more into a series or a concept if you put familiar characters into it. Yeah. I enjoy Dynasty Warriors. I love Hyrule Warriors.
Right.
It's a wonderful opportunity, something like E3 or something like a large conference to allow that to happen. You have the preamble, the wonderings, the mutterings, and then you get to have a big fanfare, a big announcement, a big showcase. And certainly, I agree with your standpoint in that the ones I'm most excited about are the Switch announcements. And also, going back a second, I think the reason I followed this one the most is, I've got more stake in upcoming releases. This is the first console generation where I'm up to date on my systems.
Yeah.
I have a Switch. I have a PS4. It's not a PS4 Pro. Xbox One has not necessarily caught my attention, which is why it's very funny that due to circumstances, the only conference I saw in real time at all was Microsoft's. But that got me to hit the ground running in wondering about the name Xbox One X.
Oh.
But that's neither here nor there. But it's a very interesting thing, too, that it feels as though E3, the way that it's become right now, or as I see it, it's almost like a massive shareholders meeting where the shareholders are gamers, are consumers, and who literally own no stakes in the company or stock. Some might. And it's as if it's a shareholders meeting held by multiple different competing companies.
Yeah.
It's an odd behemoth.
Well, yeah, and I think what's interesting also is the conferences have taken different shape. I mean, the standard form of the conference for a long time for any of these companies was person comes out, person hypes you up, person shows a video, person demos the game, person shows another video, person rambles a bit. And that was the majority of the conferences this year. But Nintendo took a bit of a different turn. Now, I first of all have to upfront say I have a huge man crush on Reggie Fils-Aimé because I think he's just really charismatic and really actually knows his audience. But that aside, it was interesting that Nintendo's Direct conference was a pre-created video with just a series of trailers. They didn't do any gameplay until they went into their treehouse, which was like their, interview spot. But it was just a solid half-hour block of previews and trailers, which I actually thought was a great way to do it. Because while, yeah, sure, we want to hear these people, these professionals talk about their craft, most of the gamers just want to see what they have to bring to the table. And I just thought it was a way more streamlined way to do the conference. Like, get the information out first and then demo the games.
I agree. Because one of the big things, certainly when I was a young gamer, when I was growing up, E3 was one of these sort of mysterious behind closed doors industry events. It was something the press went to. It was something that people in the industry went to. And then previews would come out in magazines, or you might find them in online articles, depending upon what year it was. And nowadays, it's taking that same idea, like the interviews, the showcases, everything else, these industry people, and putting it on stage with a spectacle attached, which lends itself towards certain mishaps, certain somebody who might be a great interviewer or great developer or great leader may not necessarily be as, charismatic of a spokesperson.
Right.
I mean, certainly one of the reasons why Reggie does have a great following is his odd intersection of many of these qualities.
Yes.
And the divisive reaction that he definitely draws. But having a for the public showcase of here's what's going on, here's what we're showing off, here's what we want everyone to be excited about, off to the races, because it is in fact a multi-day conference.
Yeah.
And so being able to have that kind of a showcase, it being like, this is for the public, and then it can be disseminated. People who are of the gaming press who go and get to play these things can then share their thoughts on their respective outlets. You can have individual interviews that go on from there, so people can follow through whatever track they would like. But kind of having it as the big hoorah, ballyhoo, look at this car, we're going to bring out 6 different people spectacle.
Yeah.
It's bloated, honestly.
Well, yeah, and I think something that's interesting to this year that I didn't actually notice at first, and I will credit my friend and fellow podcaster who brought it up, Dan Colonna of the Dinosaur Machines podcast, which if you haven't listened, I highly recommend it. They just did an E3 episode as well. He posted on Twitter about how, he, in quotes, like, here's a game that you just heard about today, but here's 10 hours of footage. This idea that these are games that have been under wraps for so long, but now here's an overabundance of gameplay footage almost saturating it. And I feel like in E3's past, you'd get like 20 minutes of some gameplay footage and then they'd move on to something else. But they did sit with a lot of these games for a long time. Now, Mario Odyssey has been in development for a while and is coming out this holiday. So for them to have a lot of stuff to show made sense.
Yes.
But then other games like Monster Hunter World, which we had not heard of, there was rumblings of a Monster Hunter game, but nothing big. And then they showed off all of this gameplay when you had not heard of this game at all. And is that because they just kept it under wraps really well, or is it because they're oversharing because they're excited? It's just an interesting intersection of how E3 displays its games now as opposed to in the past.
Absolutely. Although I do want to point out as a wonderful contrast to all of that, the Metroid Prime 4 announcement.
Oh yeah, which was literally the clouds forming the Screw Attack logo and then the title card, and that was it.
I watched a video of the Nintendo World live cast at the New York City Nintendo World, and the people's the attendees' reaction to that portion of the announcement, that portion of Nintendo's presentation. Like, it's such a short video, but like getting the wait, what is that? Oh no, and like hearing everybody lose their mind. They probably don't even have any images. They're just like they're just letting people know, no, we're making it. We're making it.
It's
okay.
Coming. But I mean, they did talk about Metroid in spades, though, because they gave me a reason to continue playing my 3DS, as later this year they're releasing The Return of Samus, a very famous Metroid game for the Game Boy. They're giving it the once-over like they did with Zero Mission for the GBA and re-releasing it on the 3DS. And it's a side-scrolling Metroid game, which I didn't think we would get another one of.
Well, it's certainly fun that I enjoy that Nintendo really seems to be keeping the whole Switch and 3DS as separate entities, and the 3DS, their handheld realm has always seemed to be one where older genres or established franchises can still do something that they used to do. Legend of Zelda can remain a top-down adventure game on the handhelds, even as they bring in polygons and bigger concepts and ideas from the home console games.
Yeah, I think my only concern is that, like, as a gamer, like, I'm putting a lot of time into my Switch at home and when I'm out, and to think about the idea of carrying two consoles with me when I go out because I want to play both of them, or, I mean, I guess I can switch it up and that's fine, but I don't know how much more life the 3DS will have for me just because I'm so deeply absorbed into the Switch. Now that just could be, a passing fad, and eventually it'll level out and I'll play the Switch a little less and I'll play other things more, but it's hard to say at this point.
Well, I was thinking about that recently, and the fact that, the Switch is a little bit bulky for a handheld.
Yeah.
And thinking about it as well, I'm an adult. I typically carry some sort of a large bag when I go places, and I can leave enough space for that, and etc. I can just get a nice case and this is okay. But for a child gamer, it may not necessarily be the best thing, or it's a bit of an expensive proposition and all sorts of other ideas. The 3DS is still wonderfully compact, certainly in comparison.
Yeah.
Has the great clamshell design for durability. I've literally, in my professional life, had small children, without their knowledge, jump and stand on my 3DS just because of where it happened to be in my bags when I worked with kids, and they just jumped on my bag, and I'm like, you are directly, your heel is going onto my my Pokemon machine, and it's fine. So it still has a wonderful place in the industry. So frankly, I'm not surprised. What it means for you or I or other lifestyles, that's up for debate, and that's the beauty of it all, variety.
Yeah. But going back to the conference itself, I think we could probably speak all day about what we liked and didn't like about the conference, and I don't know that we want to get too detailed into that. It's obvious that me and Jeff are Nintendo fanboys, and that's the thing that got us the most excited. But I do want to talk, at least briefly, give our 2 cents on what our favorite announcements were, and then kind of move into talking about how this yearly conference and yearly gaming releases kind of fatigue the market. If you haven't been able to tell, my favorite announcement is going to be a Switch announcement. And that, it's funny, at first I thought it was going to be a Mario Odyssey, which I think is still one of the games I'm looking forward to most. But as I said earlier, I think Kingdom Battle was a surprise that I'd be so excited about, and it comes out in August, so it's a really soon release. That's one of those games where it's like, hey, we have told you nothing about this game, but now it comes out in 2 months, enjoy, kind of a thing. But I think that because of how excited I am to get invested in a franchise that I didn't really care about, to play some of my favorite characters in a genre that I never thought they would be in, is really interesting to me beyond the obvious things that I'm excited about, like Mario Odyssey, the new Yoshi game, and the like. I think it's interesting that they're releasing a Fire Emblem Warriors game, which is going to be like Hyrule Warriors, but with Fire Emblem characters. It seems like a natural progression for continuing that partnership. I'm just actually kind of surprised. I would have thought they'd want to create this kind of high-level, really focused, great Fire Emblem game for the Switch that's based on the regular franchise. But I guess because they just put one out for the 3DS, it makes sense to move in that direction.
Absolutely. I think with Fire Emblem, they're just giving themselves a little bit of time to develop the mainline Switch announcement, or the Switch game, whatever the release may be, which actually kind of leads into one of my favorite announcements, just because it's so simple. The Pokemon for Switch announcement.
Oh, yeah.
Because when they were going to have the big Pokemon Direct announcement and like, yes, they're going to announce Pokemon for Switch. And they went, no, we're making sequels to Sun and Moon for the 3DS, which I'm actually very excited about. And there was no doubt in my mind that they would eventually make a mainline Pokemon game for the Switch. Just in that same way of like, they're eventually going to make a Metroid. They're eventually going to have to. They have to. They have to. I'm a consumer and I need these things. They have to. But it seemed like a safe bet. And the announcement basically amounted to, here's the director. Yes, we're working on one. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Next clip.
Pretty much to talk about Pokken Tournament coming to getting a deluxe version on the Switch, like they've been doing with a lot of their titles, kind of acknowledging that the Wii U wasn't nearly as successful as they wanted, is going, hey, these games that were on the Wii U, here, let's have them again.
I mean, they're really good games. As a Wii U owner, they're great games, but this is kind of what we were talking about last episode, where it's a chance for people to actually get their hands on the game with a system that they want without actually having to go back and buy the Wii U, although I'm sure they're at a great price right now.
Probably. But yeah, no, I thought that was very funny too. Also, it was exciting to me as someone who's been playing Pokemon since the Game Boy, is they've always been on handheld systems, handheld focus systems with lower graphical capacity than other systems. Now, the 3DS is pretty powerful, I'll admit, but the excitement of getting a mainstream canon title RPG Pokemon game on a TV attached console, like I've not had that experience since the Super Game Boy, I think, or the whatever the Game Boy Advanced attachment was for the GameCube. But like those systems,
Game Boy Player,
that one. But that's the only, but they were still not for that system. You could just play them on the TV. This is being designed for the Switch's capabilities. So like that got me excited, even though we have zero information on it, because it'll be very different. It'll have to be.
It's a think of the possibilities kind of thing. I mean, off the top of my head right now, as we're speaking of it, I realize the Switch is a single-player handheld console hybrid with its own multiplayer capabilities because it already comes with two controllers.
Right.
And so the possibilities of Pokemon battles that can happen on a mainline Switch title, whether between two different Switches or even building up teams within a large stable and, here's your controller, here's mine, let's battle.
Yeah.
I'm really excited about that. And so the simplicity of sometimes spectacle works. Sometimes here's 10 hours of gameplay footage is amazing. Other times, yes, you're looking in on us, we're working on this.
Yeah.
Can be just as effective.
Yeah, which is interesting. It leads back to that Metroid announcement also for Prime 4, is that, sometimes just knowing it exists and acknowledging the fans a little bit is sometimes all the fans need. But I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about the Ubisoft conference a little more, and then lead into our main topic, I think, of discussion here about yearly releases and game fatigue. Ubisoft did announce their newest Assassin's Creed, as they always do.
Yep.
And this one is called Origins. It takes place in ancient Egypt, and it's supposed to be like the beginning of the series, like how the Brotherhood came to be, which sounds cool. But I haven't played a main title Assassin's Creed game since Assassin's Creed 3, which I never finished and I got bored of. I own Black Flag and have it on my Xbox 360. I got it as a free title and still haven't played it. And I think there was the one in England, Syndicate, after that. Like, I have trouble keeping up after a while. The trailer for Origins, I looked at it and went, meh. Because Assassin's Creed was a series that when it started, the first game was awful. Like, combat-wise was terrible, but the story was really intriguing. Mm-hmm. And then the second game set the standard for the series. And I was like, this is great. But then they started releasing stuff every year. And when it was the Ezio years from Assassin's Creed 2 to Brotherhood and Revelations, like, I liked that character, so I didn't mind so much. But then once it shifted to Assassin's Creed 3, and I had this new character that I didn't care about, that I didn't feel anything for, And Desmond and his group in Modern Times, I checked out on a while ago. It was about the actual bulk of the story for me. I kind of just gave up on it. And it's at a point now where they announce a series that I used to be really into. I don't care anymore. And I start to wonder, well, is it because I couldn't keep up? Is it because there's this sense of franchise fatigue? And I feel like, at least for me personally, that's what Ubisoft has kind of done. And I mean, other companies have done it as well, but I notice it the most with the Assassin's Creed series because it's a series I initially cared about.
Absolutely. The funny thing with something like Assassin's Creed is, I mean, you made it to the third one. You played longer than me. By that point, Arkham Asylum was out, and Assassin's Creed was just proto-Batman for me. Well, because again, I care more about the character. It allows for a certain, shall I say, zaniness that appeals to me.
Sure.
And it's very funny, speaking of comic books, that sort of arc fatigue. I don't remember if I ever brought this up on previous episodes, so listeners, forgive me if I'm an old fogey repeating himself. But a big turning point for me as a comic book reader was the Civil War event. Now, the film Civil War is a lot more recent, but the comic event happened, I want to say, 10 years ago?
Something like that, yeah.
Give or take, roughly a decade. And it had it was, for me, my first big event that I collected for and had enough let's say income, not disposable, but income to buy that many comics. And there was the whole checklist of the mainline titles and all of the tie-ins that were going to be going on during the 7-month event. And by God, I bought every single one of them. From She-Hulk number 8, that was a singular crossover, to the Frontlines, twice monthly side story that was like ground level people involved in the whole thing. All of that, every piece of it. And there was a certain sense of pride. Some of the issues were better than others. Certain storylines were better than others. And if I was already following a series that crossed over, I got it. And that was cool. And I kept reading. And if it didn't get me into it.
Right.
It was for collecting for that. And when it ended, I'm like, all right, okay, cool. 2 months later, they announced World War Hulk, another big comic book event. Another checklist comes out. For a month, I did it again, and then I threw my hands up in the air, basically flipped the table, and said, "Screw this, I'm out of here."
Yeah.
And I've never really collected comics as seriously since then. I still follow. I still poke my head in on things. I buy a lot more independent comic books now because of it. I didn't want to keep up with all of that, and it felt like they were putting it out just to put it out. A strategy of, choking out the competition by just having so much there and having the name recognition of the company publishing it, which definitely Assassin's Creed's release schedule smacks of that a little bit to me.
Sure, yeah. I mean, you can say the same of Call of Duty, which is a franchise I didn't really bring up initially because I wasn't as into it as other people are. Modern shooters never really interested me. In fact, I stayed away from first-person shooters for a long time just because I'm not great at aiming in shooting games. And so, games that require skill and accuracy, I tended to stay away from.
Yes.
But I feel like, it's one of those things that I need. Well, also, I feel like maybe also more as an adult, it's a bigger problem. I mean, when the first few Assassin's Creed games came out, I was younger, I had more time for gaming, I had less responsibilities, whereas now, as an adult who works a lot and has a family, it's harder to sit down and play games, which is why I like the Switch so much, because I can play on the go as well as at home.
Yeah.
But, I think that the problem with a lot of modern gaming, and this comes back to, release schedules and game fatigue, is I think some people try to run it as a business. I mean, it's infamous that the head of EA and, the head of Ubisoft, although Ubisoft seems to be curbing it in some places a little bit, they have this idea that, we have to put things out every year or we'll lose the audience. But I think as gaming becomes more accessible, you have to allow for these games to breathe and separate.
And on one hand, there is a certain logic to that idea, because there are people that only buy a few games a year, and they have those franchises that they love. That there are people that they've bought every Call of Duty since the first Modern Warfare, which was the big OMG huge sales for them that they've been trying to, make lightning strike twice ever since. And I'm sure they've had great numbers, but they've never matched that original, boon. And there are people that own every single one of those and don't really own many other games for those systems.
Yeah.
And
I think also part of it comes from, think about like the Maddens and the NBA 2Ks, like, and the wrestling games. Those always have a new game every year. Updated rosters, new features, and whatever. And while for a while I did try and keep up with the wrestling games, I never was into any of the sports games. Just because I liked watching sports, I didn't really love playing them, both in meat space and in gaming. But I think, you got to think about EA as a company that has been releasing those kinds of games for so long that it only made sense that they would shift it to the non-sports related games. I'm just not quite sure whether it works or not. I mean, as someone who only buys as many games as he has the time to play and doesn't just buy games and let them stack up, unless we ignore my Steam library, because that's the case there, but that's another story.
That's everybody.
That's everybody who has a Steam account. I feel like when companies do that, they alienate me a little bit. I mean, because that's pretty much what happened with Assassin's Creed, is now I don't have any desire to play them because I'm like, well, if I get back into the series, I'm not going to be able to keep up. And that's a series that's so interconnected with the story that makes almost no sense still.
Yeah.
Of course I'm not going to feel like getting into it. Like, I guess with a Call of Duty game, those stories are isolated, so at least with those, they're closer to the sports games where it's just new features, updated rosters, new features, and new a new setting. Going from year to year with those at least makes a little more sense, even though I wouldn't play them. But I find it harder with something that has an intertwined storyline.
Yeah, and in particular, the sports games and those sort of yearly release styles, they don't even change that much in terms of gameplay.
No.
Maybe they improve the graphics, maybe not. I feel it would make more sense for a wrestling game where it's singular additions rather than changes in team roster, where it might make more sense and generate a little more customer goodwill to have a system in place and add wrestlers in terms of DLC, like doing a annual or 6-month pack of purchasing these new wrestlers, because sometimes when meeting deadlines, features are even dropped between releases because they can't then get it into the new one, and this can be a bit of a problem. It's still a very foggy, sticky thing to get into, but in terms of something like Assassin's Creed, you ran into something that is probably one of the worst things that can happen. Apathy.
Yeah.
You can if you have a vague release schedule and you hate one entry, there's always the next one. This can work around whatever else, and you can really get into hating that entry until the next one. But if you about one, or you don't really like that one, and then they just keep coming, it then just becomes you throw your hand up and go, why do I even bother? And you just leave the franchise entirely.
Yeah. And I mean, then again, there are some games that, like, with these broad schedules get me excited. Like, for example, we talked about Metroid Prime 4 briefly. I didn't like the Metroid Prime series. Now, I will admit that it was kind of hypocritical because I didn't really give it a chance. I threw my hands up in the air because I hate first-person shooters at the time, though I play a lot of them now, and went, oh, Metroid first-person, it should be a side-scroller. Fuck it, I don't want to play it. But that said, having seen the series and watched videos on it since, and now the hype for the fourth one, I'd be interested in a re-release on the Switch of the other three to play them, because I do want to, now that I've had enough time, they haven't been released every year, there was, space between the games, I would be interested in getting into that trilogy and enjoying it. It's something I got to do with Uncharted, which I believe I've mentioned on the show before. Never owned a PS3, always wanted to play those games, but then when the PS4 released the Uncharted collection, I got to do that. And I didn't finish 3 quite fast enough, so I haven't played 4 yet, and they're releasing another one already. But I was at least excited to have the opportunity to sit with those games because they weren't coming out every single year.
Yeah, it's almost as if sometimes in taking your time like this, it can generate retroactive goodwill.
Yeah.
But once you've sort of forced somebody out through apathy, it takes a lot more to get them back.
Yeah, I mean, think about what they've done with the Mario games, especially since Mario 64. The formulas have not changed that much. There's always been some kind of gimmick. Mario in space, Mario with a water gun, whatever. And even
Mario is a dinosaur now.
Right. And the fact that Mario can now occupy other beings or objects and use them to his advantage, which is a cool feature that's going to, waste hours of time of just trying to see what you can possess, as it were. But still, the core of the game, you still triple jump, you still gather coins, you still collect a widget, whether it's shines, stars, moons, whatever it is, it's always something. But
yeah, you still ha.
Exactly. But because the games are spaced out, you allow people to get hyped for it again. And adding one new mechanic allows people to dive in. But like someone who's never played another Mario game could still play Mario Odyssey. A lot of people complain about the repetitive story of Mario. And yes, we all would like Princess Peach to just punch Bowser in the face herself. But as it were, the stories stay fairly similar. You can kind of engage without needing much background.
And it's never been a game that's leaned heavily on its deep, engrossing story.
Right.
Deep, engrossing gameplay, certainly, but the RPG series of Mario are a lot more of the storyline, and those are the ones that will typically turn conventions on their head. So if you worry about the intricacies and storyline of the Mushroom Kingdom, those exist. If you just want to, jump and try the new mechanic, that's there. And this has always been something very funny to me about people. And when I say people, I mean a very vague kind of, forum mutterings or online publications. Like, I can't right now point to a specific person, but we've all heard these arguments. It's like, okay, Nintendo just releases, a new system. So we're going to get a Mario game. We're going to get a Zelda game. We're going to get a Kirby game. We're going to get a Yoshi game. We're going to get yeah, you are. Do you want them? Are they fun? Yeah, they're fun. That's also just 5 franchises off the top of my head, let alone all of the other ones that end up in Smash Brothers.
Right.
And those don't come out particularly annually.
No.
If you want like Call of Duty right now, as of I want to say 2 releases ago, the one where they were in space, I can't remember the name. they were in space. It took place in the future. They went full Space Marine. Like the singularity has been achieved on that one. But there was around that time that the development is divided between 3 studios, and they rotate. They're each on a 3-year development cycle. So you still get a Call of Duty every year, but it took 3 years to build each one, so you don't get too fatigued. But it's still just Call of Duty.
Yeah.
If you've got the next Mario game, then the next Kirby game, then the next Fire Emblem game, then the new Splatoon, then the new ARMS, because now that's a thing, and everything else, it's a cousin to the notion of an annual release or the franchise zombie, but it's not like every year there's a new Assassin's Creed. It's like every year, every system, there's a new Nintendo game. There's I don't know, I guess I'm just getting it. There's a lot of different ways to look at this, and the worst of it is promoting apathy through things being too narrow and too relentless.
Well, sure. But I think also the difference with Nintendo is that, you only are going to get probably 1 major Mario title, maybe 2 major Zelda titles. But think about Zelda Breath of the Wild was the game I didn't know I needed initially anyway. And I've come to love it. I have complaints about it, but all in all, I love it. And the thing is, if they had released a Zelda game every year for the main consoles, we would never get these kind of games.
No.
Sure, sometimes they're hit, sometimes they're miss, but the whole thing is with these other franchises is that it's 1 or 2 development teams that just keep pumping this stuff out. It's very smart for them to have 3 different studios working 3 years to put out another Call of Duty game.
Yeah.
At least that way you'll get a quality, but it's still emphasizing the same fatigue because these games, while different, are not different. Whereas every generation of these mainstay Nintendo games do vary from game to game, with some exceptions. Twilight Princess was fairly similar to Zelda 64 and, in gameplay, but had a new MacGuffin.
Yep, always.
So I think, while sometimes that can be fatiguing, a lot of it is, I saw the brief trailer for the unnamed new Kirby game at E3. I was excited because I'm a Kirby fanboy. I've loved all of his games. He's the reason I bought a Game Boy.
We've discussed this in the past. That same here.
Right. So seeing that the new feature looks like you can combine powers for the first time seems great. It's just another MacGuffin. The same gameplay is going to be the same gameplay. Side scroller, eat enemies, beat bosses, fight a giant tree. It's going to be the same thing. But I think I keep going back to those games because I like that it's the same thing for that. I like that with the Yoshi series, it's been more about creating cute aesthetics, but keeping the core gameplay fairly similar. And I don't mind that. Like the fact that the last Yoshi game looked like yarn, the new one looks like it's papercraft.
Yeah.
Like they're just testing things with the graphics and aesthetics. And honestly, what they're doing with Yoshi is no different than what PlayStation did with Little Big Planet. They're creating a game that looks physically real, but is not. It's still digital. And that's more or less what Little Big Planet did, and it was a huge success.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that benefit this is we mentioned a few minutes ago that Mario doesn't really have a deep engrossing storyline or even much variance.
Right.
So you can release a bunch of different ones and you can miss one, or you don't have to have like an annual catch up with these things because it's a Mario game.
Yeah.
You could be in wildly different circumstances, wildly different places. You can suddenly find yourself in New Donk City, and it's still a Mario game, one way or the other. The Super Mario Odyssey is in so many ways fundamentally different from Super Mario Brothers 3 for the NES, but in so many ways it's still the same. Whereas if you are releasing something like Call of Duty, like Assassin's Creed, I feel really bad that we're blanking on other annual franchises because it feels like we are haranguing these guys. But there's almost a feeling of follow the story, keep up with what, certainly with Assassin's Creed, follow up what's going on with Desmond.
Yep.
And Call of Duty, it's, keeping up on this very political style thing, very, it's meant to be very story heavy, very hard hitting, very emotional roller coaster. And that on top of it, it's also very fatiguing. That's just like, please keep having these rich steaks all the time, every day, every meal. Here you go. Steak, steak, steak. Steak's delicious. I like steak. Not every meal. Please, I can only take so much.
Right. Well, also, it's funny you mentioned briefly games and the story consistency. I mean, talking about Zelda's franchise that I love, I've not played every Zelda. I never played Wind Waker. I barely played Skyward Sword. I never finished Twilight Princess. But yet I still play every Zelda and give them a try because I'm interested in the basic mechanics of a Zelda game. And that's where I think games with release schedules like that have strength. Also, talking about rushed development times, often Assassin's Creed has had, and we continue to beat up on it, but it's ripe for discussion, has so many graphical glitches and errors and problems because they rushed those cycles. Whereas a new Zelda game takes 4 years, so it's as pitch perfect as it's going to be when it comes out. But if you're releasing a game every year, of course you're going to miss stuff. We're human. We're not perfect beings, and so there are going to be huge glitches. And yes, we can patch them post-release, but that feels sloppy to me. If you just let these games have a 2 or 3 or 4 year release cycle, you might be able to iron out those glitches and fine-tune those games better. And I think rush development has been the biggest bane of the game industry in a while, because I believe that some DLC is truly DLC and is developed after the fact. I do believe some DLC is developed because, we can't fit this in the time we have to develop, so we'll release it later and make them pay for it.
Yeah, I mean...
And I don't love that culture.
Agreed. I mean, as far as DLC day one kind of things, one of my favorite stories is the last Tony Hawk Pro Skater, that the entire... the disc is just the tutorial level, and you actually have to download the entire game due to having to be rushed due to a contract expiring.
Yeah.
But... the video game industry has known the crunch since the early 80s, since the advent of video games, and it's a very unfortunate thing. And I guess another big part of the thesis of this episode is E3 is a very symptomatic example of it, one that is both cause and perpetrator of. In terms of, you need to have things to present for this annual thing. You set a release date. If you change it, everyone's going to be really angry at you. You push it back and push it back. Should you talk about this now? Can't you talk about this now? What's going on? And while that is going to happen anyway, having either an annual, a semi-annual, 4 times a year, 8 different conventions, things to have to show off and things to have to showcase, a big advertising campaign in the guise of a industry conference, it's a little no, it is very much fatiguing, and I think it's a detriment to development. Again, yeah, not to kick Assassin's Creed and lionize Nintendo, but I always love the Miyamoto quote that uh, a delayed game can eventually be good. A rushed bad game is always a bad game.
No, yeah, for sure. And it's like, as a kid, I would always be so upset when games get pushed back. But as an adult, I go, all right, well, it sucks. I want it now, but it means they can just work on it more and make it better. It's this idea that you're taking time with games, and I think it's why I think keeping certain games a secret until the right moment of release is to their strength. I mean, I'm someone who loved Dragon Ball Z growing up, and the new announcement of this new Dragon Ball Z game being created by the people who made Guilty Gear, which is a series that I liked but I was never super into, is exciting because it looks really cool. And the best part is, because they didn't say anything about it till E3 and they waited until they had something great to show off, it shined brighter than one of the biggest gaming franchises, Marvel vs. Capcom, because it looked better, it was streamlined, it was prepared, whereas Marvel vs. Capcom Ultimate looked sloppy, the graphics weren't great, it looked unfinished, and it's because of that pressure to want to show something off, and it ends up making the game look not great. Now, the new Marvel vs. Capcom could end up being phenomenal. I'm excited that they're putting in an actual story mode. I'm curious how that'll work. But if they don't use the reactions at E3 as a lesson to slow their roll and kind of work on the bugs, we're going to have a game that's released that's unfinished or imperfect. And no game needs to be perfect, but it has to be playable.
Yeah.
I think Andromeda had that same problem. I haven't played the new Mass Effect yet, but I'd heard because of the sort of complications with its release schedule, graphically, there were a lot of issues.
Yes.
And that's a bummer. Aesthetics are important to a game now. Sure, you can go back and play Chrono Trigger, and it's great. It's sprites, and it's great. But, graphics have a heavy hold on modern gaming, and while the graphics don't always have to be realistic, they have to at least be consistent. If they're consistent, then people tend to be satisfied. But if there are a lot of bugs, it really throws you out of the moment, the game, the experience.
And then, although to be fair, graphics have always been a very big deal in the video game industry. It's just with the advent of 3D and physics engines, and you make things more complicated, and there are far more ideas of realism or pseudo-realism and everything else that fall by the wayside. And I'm struck very much by a lot of the things that I watched during the Microsoft conference, during Sony, during a lot of these, where the games that push the most towards realism left me cold.
Yeah.
It's because, again, that same idea of, well, it needs to be absolutely this, rather than even a small amount of, okay, we're going a little ridiculous here, so bear with me. So if it's a little off, if you jump a little too high, if things seem a little odd, you're like, whatever. Not entirely, but you can be like, yeah, but the textures look great.
Well, yeah, it's suspension of disbelief.
Yeah, and it's very funny that kind of what we were talking about with Nintendo not having to make big announcements to have a big effect. The Dragon Ball Z, the latest fighting game, while it doesn't have its own established company in a sense of who's making the Dragon Ball fighting games. It does move around a little bit. So you do have to have a proof of concept when you show it.
Yeah.
Because there have been so many different kinds since the Super Nintendo days.
Yeah.
So that is important. Whereas Marvel vs. Capcom, they don't need to show a lot to get big excitement. They could have taken the best pieces of whatever they had, shown just that much, or even just made a general announcement, and it would have had a great effect. And so, in overshowing their hand, that actually does a disservice. So even that Miyamoto quote, it's not just the release itself, it's all of the milestones that you hit along the way. And I know that a lot of the pressure here is on the publisher side, because they like to keep a certain release schedule because, hey, they're bankrolling the game and they got to get their money back.
Yeah.
And this absolutely makes sense. But it is a very, very complicated dance of things of what do you show, don't show, what can you announce, can't announce, how often before people lose interest. both on the not often enough and too often side. And on the not often enough side, and kind of talk in light of what we were talking about last episode, Beyond Good and Evil 2 is a thing.
Yeah.
And that's a game that I absolutely love. That was one of those when I was rebuilding my collection, I had to have it for my GameCube again. I know it's on other systems. My original was on GameCube. That's a personal thing for me. And that's a matter where they can take the time that they want. And I know rumors of Beyond Good and Evil 2 have surfaced and died, but this seems like they definitely had a lot of deliverables there that make me feel like it's going to happen, and I'm excited about that. And 15 years, 17 years, 15 years, I'd say. Not too long. I'm still interested.
Right.
You've still got me here. So who's to say?
Yeah, and also, I think that we're coming at this from a very specific lens based on our own personal experiences. Because when it comes down to it, gaming is a lot about that, like most medium. But I think that I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I think there's a consideration and an understanding of the industry that's required, and we for sure don't know all the ins and outs. But definitely from the perspective of enthusiasts, at least we have an idea of what we think works best for us and what seems to perceptively work well in general. That said, if you're listening to us now and there are other franchises either that you think are over fatigued or under fatigued or whatever, please let us know. Like, I love the fact that we've been able to curate minor discussion on the Facebook page about, the episodes we post and the videos we post and the interest in certain things, and I want to continue to encourage that. We love hearing from you guys.
Agreed.
And, chatting about that stuff. And it's like, I beat on Assassin's Creed because I think it's the games series I've had the biggest fallout with. But there are plenty of others. And if there are others that you feel are even worse culprit of this, please let us know in comments and other posts.
Yeah, I mean, some of them we might even know a lot about, but we've just become so fatigued by them that it's that kind of thing of, oh, I never noticed that mess anymore. It's just been there for years. My eyes just gloss over it.
Right.
Bring that back to our attention. What are the ones that, what are your personal experiences? Because at the end of the day, a lot of what we talk about here, we like to have big discussions about big ideas, but they are always through the lens of personal experience. And the internet is a wonderful tool for sharing those personal experiences. And while we can get a sense of how other people feel by reading these discussions, having these discussions through this podcast, through our Facebook page, through email as well, is a really great way to bring them into the light and share them and really provide a richer experience for everyone.
And to that effect, I do want to give a shout out to Scoop Joey. For those who don't know why he's called Scoop Joey, there's a podcast that I am a fan of called Matt and Mattingly's Ice Cream Social. And I met Joey on my honeymoon when he was touring around with that podcast. They were doing a meetup on the cruise where my honeymoon was. And so I met him and his wife. And we've both been very interactive on the internet. And he's been a fan of this podcast since we started it, which is very sweet. He gave us plenty of compliments in his email he sent us. But he did respond to our, our call out for remakes and how people feel about them. And while I'm not going to read the whole email word for word here, I do want to thank Joey for reaching out. And I do want to comment on his re-release or remade game that he really wants, which is Power Stone, which I had forgotten about as a franchise until he wrote it in that email, because I remember playing the hell out of that on the Dreamcast, and it did kind of vanish into obscurity, and I would love to see someone resurrect that and bring that series back.
Yeah, all it ever got was a PSP collection.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's right. I forgot it was on the PSP collection,
which I guess means it's on the PSN network, on the PSN store. I'm not PSN network. Geez, on the PSN store. I haven't looked. I think it might be actually.
Yeah. But I do want to thank you, Joey, for reaching out. We appreciate the email. Please keep them coming. We love continuing to encourage a conversation on all social medias about this show. It's kind of what the point of it is. We're just two game nerds who like talking about gaming. We want to have more conversations like that. Of course, if you're not following us anywhere on the internet, you can look for us at Fun and Games Pod pretty much anywhere, at gmail.com, on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, although we haven't really posted much on Instagram. That's my fault. but please continue to interact. We love it. I think, a real big reason why I wanted to address E3 today was ultimately because the culture around gaming is why we do this, as well as the artistry of it. And E3 kind of showcases both of it, the highs and the lows.
Agreed.
And I think it was an interesting way to tie in this release schedule conversation, since E3 is ultimately all about big releases and big news.
It's the big market announcement.
Yes, for sure. But again, I do want to thank our listeners. We appreciate it. If there's anything you want us to do on the podcast, we're all also very early in the life cycle. We do hope to bring guests on the show in the future and talk to people in the industry, as we both have some connections there. But if there's any topic you want us to cover or something you want us to talk about, please let us know that as well.
Absolutely. We're talking big concepts here, but I mean, we bring in our personal experiences. We'd love to hear your personal experiences, and we'd love to see which aspects people want.
Yes.
We're here.
And Joey, I'll reach out to you personally, but if you're interested, I would love to share your words on the Facebook page so other people can interact with your thoughts as well. If you'd rather it stay between us, then that's perfectly fine as well. But I'd love to get other people's takes on your opinion on remakes and re-releases, because I think you bring up some really valid points. And coming from a place where you say that often it doesn't really matter to you. It depends on the intent, and you're fairly neutral on it as a whole. I think is a really interesting way to come about it. And so I would love to chat more about that.
Agreed.
All right, guys. Well, thank you for listening to another episode of Fun and Games. It's always a pleasure to do this. Next week, hopefully a little bit of a lighter topic, but I do like to keep this constant through line. Because, I mean, it is about fun and games, and even though fun is in quotes, we do want to talk about the lighter side of gaming as well. But I think it's important to address the industry stuff that I'm sure we're all feeling. I mean, I know we are, because I'm in a gaming group on Facebook, and people complain constantly about some of the nonsense.
Yeah, because it is all about the games, but there is a lot that gets into it before it can even be all about the games. So, thank you very much, everybody, for listening. I'm Jeff Moonen.
And I'm Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
And happy gaming.